Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you for attending this meeting of the Finance Committee. My name is Zahira Naz. I'm a councillor in the Darnell ward. I'm also chair of the Finance Committee. The meeting today is open to the public. The information in Appendix 2 to item 8 on the agenda is no longer exempt as the funding has been announced by the government. This meeting will be webcast and the recording will also be available for people to view later through the Council's website. It is also possible that Sheffield Live TV will record and rebroadcast this meeting. We have received no public questions or petitions. Please can I request that mobile telephones and such equipment are switched in silent mode so not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. There is no fire test planned for today. If there's an emergency evacuation, please take instruction from the Town Hall staff. The assembly point is Tudor Square. For the benefit of the webcast, please can each Finance Committee member introduce themselves, and I'll start with you, Councillor Chaplin.
Good afternoon. Mike Chaplin, Councillor for Southey Ward.
Councillor Mary Lee for Darnell Ward.
Sorry, Mary, I'll just slip out.
Good afternoon, Chair. Councillor Ibiullah, Netherridge and Sharrow.
Councillor Ted Mallinson, Hillsborough Ward.
Marion Elliott, Green Councillor for Gleadless Valley.
Shafak Mohammed, Ecclesall Ward.
Glynis Chapman, Mosborough Ward.
Mike Lever, West Ecclesfield Ward.
Can I also ask officers to introduce themselves? Start with you, Phil.
Philip Gregory, Director of Finance and Commercial Services at the Council Section 151 Officer.
David Hollis, General Counsel.
Rachel Appleyard, Principal Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you very much, everybody. Is there any apologies for absence?
Receive no apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Exclusions of the public and press. There's no items today. Declarations of interest. Do any members wish to declare an interest? No? Minutes of the previous meeting can be found on page 11 of the agenda pack. Are these a correct record of the meetings? Minutes of the Finance Committee held on the 11th of September? All agreed? Yep, thank you, that's agreed. Item 5, public questions and petitions. We have received no public questions or petitions. Item 6, members' questions. No questions have been submitted by members in advance of the meeting. Item 7, work programme. This can be found on page 21 of the agenda pack. And I'll pass on to Rachel Appleyard.
Thank you, Chair. The work programme sets out all known agenda items for forthcoming meetings of this committee. There haven't been any changes to the work programme since the last meeting, and from page 19 onwards you can see the details of items due at forthcoming meetings. Thank you.
Councillor Levery.
Thanks, Chair. I did note there was one change on the work programme. The Community Buildings Policy and Community Asset Transfer Policy has been taken off for November. I believe it's going on S&R committee for November, but this is a significant policy. It will have major financial implications for the council and also for communities as well. And could I suggest that if it is going to go to S&R, that the Finance Committee are briefed in advance, and also I believe it should go to the Communities Committee as well, because this will make a significant impact on community buildings out there in the rest of the city. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it will be going to Strategy and Resources Committee for a decision. I can speak to officers outside the meeting about making sure Finance Committee members are briefed.
Yep, thank you. Any further questions or comments? No. So regarding that, if we do get a briefing at the Finance Committee as well, please. Thank you. Moving on to item 8. Sorry,
just in advance, is the meeting, the Finance Committee before? I think we need some time to look at this, Chair. it's quite a significant policy, and with fairly wide-ranging implications. I think we can't just have a few days before SNR just have a look at this. I think we need to see it earlier, if that's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree, Councillor Levy. We need to see it as soon as possible, really, don't we, so that we can proper have a discussion about it in our finance committee group. So is that okay, Rachel?
Yeah.
Rachel will keep us updated in regards to that. Councillor Lee?
Does that mean we'll get a briefing prior to the committee on this issue? Yeah.
Yeah. So there isn't any further questions regarding this. Okay, so we'll move on to item 8, the capital approvals for month 5, and this can be found on page 35. And Damien Watkinson will be presenting.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Damien Watkinson. I'm the Finance Manager in the Financial and Commercial Services team. I'm here to present the changes to the capital programme as a result of the month 5 monitoring process. There are changes to the budgets of capital schemes and inclusion of new schemes, a grant to a third party and a grant to accept. I'll move through the brief summary of the scheme changes to schemes. So under Transport, Regen and Climate Change, the new additions we have are feasibility works required to look at the implementation of enforcing moving traffic offences at 3 locations which are noted in the papers. We've got 380k to deliver on-street charges for electric vehicles at 9 locations. Again, these are identified in the papers. There's 605k, which is largely funded by brownfield land release funding that's come from central government for the redevelopment of a couple of sites at Gleadless Valley, sites of former care homes. This funding is being given so that this land can be redeveloped so that it's available for affordable housing. Under the variations on the Transport, Regen and Climate Change, we've also got one to the Devonshire Quarter, which is a budget we've got for assembly of land for the redevelopment of area in the Devonshire Quarter. We're also adding some of this brownfield land release funding into that scheme. There's an area at Thomas Street where there's some remediation works that this will contribute towards that again will allow this land to be released for affordable housing. We've got variations to a couple of transport schemes. Moving from feasibility stage to delivery stage on the 20-mile-an-hour zone at High Green. That's going to be an extra 109,000 from our local transport plan allocation. And we're introducing the Kelham section of the Kelham and Neeps End parking scheme. So that's actually a reduction of 130k from the budget that's approved at the moment because we're just developing the Kelham element at the moment. The Neeps End element will come forward at a later stage. We've got amendments to a couple of items on the Stocksbridge Towns Fund. So we're moving forward with grants to the Rugby and Football Club at a total of 225k. That is one of the grants that's one of the grants for issue that you'll find in Appendix 3 of the papers. So that's to allow those bodies to develop their pitches and facilities in the Stocksbridge area. We've had a slight increase on the Oxley Park Phase 2 scheme. It's just 9k, but it's a contribution from the Friends of Group. So we're adding that into the budget, and some of that spend is slipping into next financial year, around 380k, as part of the delivery of the overall Stocksbridge programme. We're spending a little extra on feasibility on the cycling and walking element of the Stocksbridge Towns Fund. It's looking at feasibility looking at improving the links to Underbank Reservoir so people can more easily access the trails around the area, which will complement some investment that Yorkshire Water are due to make in the area. A little bit of slippage on the Future High Streets Fund grants programme. So all the grants that were going to be made from the front door scheme have been allocated. It's just some of those payments will now move into next financial year. And then under our Levelling Up Fund programme, we're bringing in 468k to develop 5 car parks in the Attercliffe area, which is going to be complementary to other active travel elements of the scheme that are going forward. So that will improve off-street parking in those areas so that more active travel can be brought onto the highway. Communities, Parks and Leisure, just one item. It's 15k of Section 106 funding for improvements at Totley Bents cricket pitch. And then under housing, we've got in our housing investment programme 486k for improved fire safety works at the Manor House Older Persons Independent Living scheme. We've received further local authority housing funding. So you might recall in previous meetings we've had this funding from government, mainly geared towards houses for Ukraine refugees. We've received another 1.4 million for this. We'll be adding some of our own funding in, and it will allow us to purchase an extra 20 properties, which will then come into the general needs of our social housing pot once they've been used for the refugee purposes. We're funding 4.5 million to acquire 15 four-bed properties at Hackenthorpe. These are new builds as part of our stock increase programme. There will be 10 for rent and 5 will go into our shared ownership programme. We've had cost increases at our new build scheme at Daresbury and Berners. We're building 73 new properties. It's now going to cost a total of 14.9 million. This is going up by 1.1. We've had significant delays relating to the statutory providers, electricity, gas, etc., and additional site security measures. There is a full description of the difficulties faced on that site in the papers. The Newstead site was being developed for affordable housing, for council housing. That has now been put on hold due to the prices that have been coming back and the tender inflation we've seen in the construction industry. We're now we're going to make that site, we're going to reinstate it so it's accessible by the public while this scheme is on pause. So there is a 1.3 million saving that was made on the original scheme to enable the site ready for housing. That's now going to be used to reinstate it so it's safe and we can save on security costs that would otherwise be necessary on that site. Moving on to the education, children and families, as part of the special educational needs strategy, we're spending 33k on some feasibility to look at reconfiguring Mossbrook School to provide some additional SEND places there. We're making a £520,000 grant to Sheffield South East Academy Trust to develop 30 new integrated resource places at Norfolk, Phillimore and Wyburn schools. And we're also adding 30k into the Stannington Integrated Resource project due to increased costs at that site to a total of 355k. We're investing some money in demolishing chimneys at Shooters Grove and Door primary schools to remove ongoing liabilities there, just so that that's not something we no longer have to keep an eye on and becomes a potential liability if they look like they may need to be repaired at any stage. We're putting £68,000 into Bents Green Lodge to convert this site into a one-bedroom placement for children with complex care needs. That should help us to release other beds around our care system and allow us to provide better care, and should generate some savings from having to place people outside the city as well. We have a little bit of slippage on Watercliff Meadows retaining walls works. Some of that work was hopefully going to take place this year. We've missed the window in the summer holidays, so we're going to do some of that work most urgent in October and move the rest into next year. Under economic development and skills, we're just putting in year 2 of the Community and Cultural Assets programme. So this is grant funded from UK Shared Prosperity Fund. The combined authority have now confirmed year 2 of that allocation, so that's 1.5 million going into that scheme to be grant funding for community asset buildings to become more energy efficient. I think I've mentioned the grants for issue. They are to the Sheffield South East Academy Trust. I think this will be in Appendix 4. And also in, that'll be Appendix 3. Appendix 4 is the grant for acceptance. This is the local neighbourhood transport complementary programme. So historically, we've had an annual allocation from central government via the Passenger Transport Executive for small-scale interventions like the 20-mile-an-hour schemes that you see here and the pedestrian crossings, small cycle improvements, etc. And that's generally been £3 million a year. That's now been rolled up into the 5-year sustainable transport settlement that the Combined Authority have received. So we've got certainty of that over 5 years now, and that is 17.5 million roughly over 5 years. So we're bringing that to accept that funding. We've had the agreement through for that. Just to say the schemes will still progress in the normal way. So Transport, Regen and Climate Change will approve the principle of any schemes, and any approval of the spend of that money will still come via this, this committee. That's my whistle-stop tour.
Thank you, Damon. Councillor Mohammed.
Yeah, Damien, page 54.
Bear with me, I just need to log back onto my computer. Screen's gone.
It's the Main Street Happenfall.
Yes.
£4.5 million for 15 houses. That equates to 300,000 per house. A quick search on Google suggests that house prices on that street are considerably less. I've just seen a free bed for 200,000. Surely, are we getting value for money would be the genuine question. And the follow-up would be, after how long, if some of 10 of these that are going into the general housing need, will someone be able to exercise right to buy? And how much will they be able to buy it offers for?
The purchases themselves have been through the viability, affordability and value for money models that are run by the housing team. So they're considered to be a value for money as brand new builds. In terms of the detail of the right to buy, I would have to go back and double check regs on that. But yeah, obviously any council housing property is subject to that, but I believe on new additions to the stock, there might be some longer term on that. Yeah.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question just on one of the items, page 50, the Stocksbridge Town Fund's walking and cycling trails. So it's really disappointing that the original project's been abandoned, and some stakeholders are understandably bitterly disappointed by that, such as the Upper Don Trail Trust. So what are the implications for the funding from Sustrans and the other external sources that were set aside for this project? Do you know?
I don't know. At this stage, I'd only been involved in the Stocksbridge Towns Fund element of this stage, and because it was at feasibility stage so far, the business case for the full scheme hadn't been brought forward. So I'd not seen the wider side of that yet. But I do know, yeah, that it's been a sensitive issue. So what I'm bringing forward is what's been brought through and agreed with the Towns Fund board, the next stage of this scheme, as it were. So this is what I'm bringing forward for approval.
Okay, thanks. I mean, I think it's worth mentioning that the trust specifically, you know, they remain in the dark about the decisions that have been made by the board, and could we ask for assurances that that information will be released to all the stakeholders? Because obviously they've been massively invested in this project, and they're still in the dark about what's happened in terms of the decision making.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, that's the Towns Board are effectively the commissioners for this, and as the council, we are enacting their decisions. So that would be a matter for the Towns Board. So I can certainly mention it to colleagues who have closer links with the Towns Board.
That'd be brilliant, thank you.
Councillor, yeah, okay. David would like to come on into that.
I do think that the Towns Fund Board minutes are published. So I think we assist in that publication. So I don't know how much detail's in them, but I know their decisions and minutes are published. And it's a requirement of the funding that they do that. So I don't know whether that helps at all.
Thank you, David. Councillor Mallison.
Thank you, Chair. Just really following up on that question about the Stocksbridge Towns Fund. The Upper Don Trail Trust has actually issued a public statement in the last week about the fact that they're not being included in consultations. I find it quite worrying that there's a lot of opacity. It's not clear what is going on, what's happened to this £24 million scheme and why it's been reduced by such a huge amount to just, at this stage, just a small scheme around one reservoir rather than the much greater scheme which that sum of money was aimed to support. So I think it would be really useful. I appreciate it is another body that is responsible for it, but it is a large amount of public money. And I think questions should be asked from the authority to the Stocksbridge Authority about what's happened to this, and some clarity should be provided. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I can only, refer people back to Stocksbridge Town's board on this. I'll bring schemes through that are brought forward through our capital delivery service at the request of the town's board. But yeah, I believe that's where that matter sits.
The boards that we facilitate.
Okay, so if you can speak to colleagues, Damien, and we'll try to get some information back to Councillor Elliott and Malison. Okay. Any further questions for Damien? Councillor Levery.
Thanks, Chair. Page 40 on the electric vehicle charges, Damien. Do we have a full list of sites for where we're proposing to have these installed? Or have we just got these 9 and that's it, and then we find some more after? How does it work?
In terms of the overall strategy for the city for on-street charging and general EV charging, I'm aware that there's a report being prepared for TRC on the overall strategy. I think Councillor Malison's asked me a question on it at maybe a previous briefing meeting. That was, I think, that was a response I got back to you with, wasn't it, Councillor Malison? Yeah, so I think we're just awaiting a report that will go to TRC, so hopefully that should contain the details of that strategy that you're looking for.
It's our commitment in terms of funding is significant because the DFT are only putting in 84,000 out of a 380,000 pot. So, if we're going to start putting charges all over, this is a major capital investment decision for the council. Maybe we should have a look at that when it goes to TRC financially and see what the commitment is, because it is a lot.
Thank you. Toby Malison, can I just ask you to turn your mic off, please? Thank you. Okay, thank you. There isn't any further questions or comments. This report does contain recommendations for approval. Can I ask, are we all agreed? Yeah? So that's unanimous. Thank you very much, Damien, for that. Moving on to the next item on page 85 of the agenda pack, and that's the review of the Sheffield Council Tax Reduction Scheme. And presenting officer is John West.
Hi, I'm John West, Senior Revenues and Benefits Manager, and I'm here to present the report on the Council Tax Reduction Scheme review. The report recommends that the Finance Committee notes the review of the Council's Council Tax Reduction Scheme, detailed in the report, agrees that the scheme isn't revised, apart from changes the Council is required to make by statute, and approve any statutory amendments, agrees that the Council's Council Tax Hardship Scheme continues to operate as detailed in the report, and agrees that officers begin a further detailed review of its Council Tax Reduction Scheme and bring a paper back to the Finance Committee in the new year to consider options for its 25-26 scheme. So the government requires every local authority to review its council tax reduction scheme each year. This report is the outcome of this year's review. Sheffield's council tax reduction scheme, otherwise known as council tax support, has been in place since 2013 when council tax benefit was abolished. Our scheme, like many others, is based on the old council tax benefit rules, although the maximum amount of support we provide to working age households because of an initial cut in government funding is capped at 77% of their council tax liability. There's no cap in support for pensioner households because their scheme is set by government. In Sheffield, around 42,000 households receive council tax support at a cost of around 40 million. 25,000 of those are working age households. We also have a council tax hardship scheme, which provides an additional £2.3 million in support to the most financially vulnerable. The report gives examples of some of the other kinds of schemes that are in place around the country, but it's fair to say that because they are discretionary, every authority will operate a different scheme to some degree or another. The report goes on to recommend that we retain our current scheme in 24-25 so that we can continue to offer the following benefits. Retain close alignment with our housing benefit scheme, which is administered through the same IT system using the same application process. As a means-tested benefit, it aims to distribute support as fairly as possible, ensuring that those with the greatest need receive the greatest level of support. There will be no added cost and disruption of changing IT systems, retraining staff, amending documentation and so on. And it maintains consistency of support to working age households by avoiding any changes in support that an amended scheme may bring. To fully develop options for an alternative scheme to present to members, go out to consultation, implement any system, administration and staffing changes will require a significant amount of time. We need to make sure that we give ourselves enough time and resource to do this. So finally, the report also recommends that we begin to develop options for our 25-26 scheme right away so that we are prepared to make any changes to our scheme in 25-26 if that is what members decide.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in looking at this, you propose to do changes and bring it back to the Finance Committee sometime next year. Wondered whether you could bring it back as soon as possible so we have a chance to look at it. It's a substantial amount of money that is being spent. And when you look at page 88, it's saying in paragraph 2.8 that the cost to the council will be 41.8 million for 24-25. So it's a large amount of money which will only increase. And if there are going to be changes, we need to discuss them, look at them, and make the decisions early.
Yeah, I quite agree. And officers are working on a briefing paper to bring before finance briefing members so that we can start that process off. The idea would be that we would start a sort of a soft consultation exercise with members and other officers and other parties around the city who have an interest, so that by the time we come to the formal governance process, that we have some fully worked up options for members to make decisions on. But we also need to understand the scope of what members are considering, so cost parameters, customer focus, that sort of thing. So that's what we aim to do, is to start that process off, like you say, as soon as possible.
There is any further questions or comments? David, did you want to come in? Sorry, Councillor Lee.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to be clear, so in 2013 the government cut the subsidy, so that was a £5 million cut to the council's revenue, along with all the cuts we had to make in that particular year that were brought in by the coalition government at that time.
Yeah.
Just to be clear that the coalition government made those cuts to the council, as they did to all other councils. They reduced the subsidy.
That's absolutely right, yes.
Imposing all the other savings, cuts, whatever you wanted to call them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
David, would you like to come in?
Yeah, just one slight technical point, Chair. It's on point 5 in the recommendations, where it recommends bringing a paper back to the Finance Committee. Technically, this is a matter which falls within the remit of Strategy and Resources. So Strategy and Resources did agree for the 24-25 scheme that Finance Committee ought to take the decision, but they've not done so in relation to the 25-26. So it might be worth just saying to bring back a paper in the new year to consider options, and then that will either go to SNR or SNR might decide that that should come here. But I think just technically we can just take out the words to the Finance Committee. I'm sure, whether informally, this committee will have some role anyway.
Yeah, that's fine. Councillor Chaplin?
Yeah, it's just absolutely fine with the report and the presentation, but the numbering system throws me. So you get all the way up to 2.13, and then you get 0.2, how does the decision contribute? And then from there on, it's 3.1, 3.2. I suppose it's because I'm used to seeing numbering systems where the main heading actually starts with the number and then you work through with the numbers progressing.
To be honest, Councillor, I had a lot of problems with the format of this report. We have this really dodgy template that we have to try and complete. I was complaining because it took me half as long to actually try and format it as it did to write the thing. So I quite agree that we should have some sort of standardised and easier format for officers to write reports.
So you were being confounded by the software?
It was, yeah. No, yeah. Absolutely. It was absolute killer. Yeah.
That is very worrying,
I agree, Councillor Chaplin. It does throw you off a bit. Okay, thank you for that, John. There isn't any further questions or comments, but we will get some clarification in regards to whether this goes to SNR or whether it comes to Finance Committee. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so this report does contain items for recommendations. Are we all agreed? Yeah, that's agreed. That's unanimous. Moving on to item 10. Thank you. The corporate debt policy. This can be found on page 103 of the agenda pack, and the presenting officer is Tim Hardy.
Thank you, Chair. So to Finance Committee today, we've brought the corporate debt policy. This has been a policy that's been in development for a number of years in actual fact. The local authority's always had a number of operational policies in relation to how it deals with the issue of debt management, so income collection right through to enforcement if that proves to be necessary. But we've never actually had an overarching policy that brings all that operational practice together. So that's really the purpose behind the policy that's in front of members today. It's, I think one of the things that perhaps, in terms of capturing good practice and that sort of thing, that the policy brings together a number of different strands. So it brings together issues around dealing with vulnerability and those kind of issues with particular customer groups and cohorts that might find themselves in difficulty making their payments. But it also has a wider operational angle to it in relation to operational modernisation, system modernisation, those kind of issues as well. The other thing that it helps is actually it helps the council articulate its position in relation to debt management and the vulnerable. So rather than that being an answer that's provided by a number of services individually, that the council can say it's made a decision on a corporate level, and therefore it's able just to articulate its position in a more straightforward fashion. In many ways, I don't consider the actual report from Fondy to be that controversial. In many ways, it's simply articulating what we should be doing as a matter of course. So, in basic terms, I suppose there's the operational side of moving away from invoices towards prepayments, more emphasis about delivering some of our services through electronic means rather than paper transactions and those kind of things. It does make the point that there's a clear expectation that the council will recover money that's owed to it, which we need to do from I suppose, a guardian to the public purse perspective. But in addition to that, it also recognises our responsibilities to the more vulnerable citizens that we have to deal with on a daily basis. The other aspect that the report brings into play is priority of debt itself, and actually being clear in what order and what are the more important debts to recover. In a small number of cases where a customer or member of the public might owe us money from more than one account effectively. I think to give effect to the policy's broadest ambitions, I think we do need to recognise that there's a modernisation agenda and theme running through all of this, and that's not necessarily a straightforward thing to administer and implement in an organisation as complicated and multifaceted as Sheffield City Council. To do all these things to the best of our ability would actually require a significant investment across the board, so that there are some choices that would need to be made about how we tackle that and in what order we basically tackle it. But I think just simply articulating it, putting it into simple language and putting it out there publicly is actually helpful in its own sense. It means that when we come to decisions around, future systems, future finance systems, or the systems that my team would use to run the revenues benefit service, for example, we can have those as part of our regard right from the beginning when we're in that commissioning phase. But even if you're in a static world where you've got a system for the next 5-10 years, there's always going to be modernisation, there's always going to be development, and again, you can look to these principles and say to yourself, well, in accordance to that, that's something we should be trying to invest in and do. So the policy is partly about just giving us a bit more strategic direction around those issues, a statement of intent, if you like. I think that's probably all I'm going to say in terms of introducing the item. So it's really, I suppose, just a matter of any questions from the Finance Committee.
Councillor Ulla.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tim, for the presentation. Are we going to make use of any external debt recovery services?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that question.
Are we going to make any use of any external debt recovery services?
Yes, we will do, which is actually, that's still operational practice at the moment, and it does, of course, lead us on to the next report on the item as well. So there's always a need, in my opinion, for us to have both in-house capability and also external capability as well. So broadly speaking, we're actually moving more towards most of our, I suppose, advanced recovery action being dealt with by our in-house department and team, and we've invested in that in the last few years actually to build that team up from quite a small base where it was predominantly working in parking services originally. But there are instances where you would want an external agent to be involved. The most common reason for that would be if you're dealing with somebody out of the borough. So if you're needing to pursue a debt that's actually beyond the confines of Sheffield City Council, it's often much more cost effective to use a national agency for that. So that's one of the primary reasons for it. And the adoption of this policy doesn't move us away from that expectation. That would still be part of our business model going forwards.
Sure. If we do, can we make sure that these agents, external agents, target those who won't pay, not necessarily those who can't pay? You talked about vulnerable families and vulnerable individuals. Can we make sure that happens, or is that?
Yeah. Well, yes, absolutely. We can ensure that happens. That is part and parcel of the requirements that we have in place with the contract we have with our external agents now. So, in just the same way as we give direction to our own enforcement agents about how to handle an situation appropriately, exactly that same instruction goes to those external bodies in the same way. So, it is. I think there is perhaps a perception that with an external agency those aren't considerations, but in actual fact that is a key part of the contract and the terms that they do have regard to that. And frankly, they operate in quite a highly regulated industry in actual fact. So that these things are definitely part of their their sphere to consider when they're looking at individual cases. Absolutely.
Councillor Mallison.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Just to sort of let people here who weren't involved in some of the other meetings know, there was discussion about this very topic about the internal versus external people, and also about how we can sort of get a clear definition of what because I don't think it's always clearly defined between can't pay and won't pay, and making staff who are dealing with people have a standard way of assessing that, so that they know which side to put people in, and also to judge whether people are vulnerable, what criteria create that vulnerable status, where they get maybe more compassionate treatment in terms of debt collection. There was also discussion, of course, about the specification when you're going out to tender for, maybe this is the next item, when you're going out to tender for debt collection, making sure that they are ethical in the way they conduct themselves, and there's some monitoring of that.
Yeah, I quite agree that does reflect our discussions, and yes, absolutely, it's one of our key considerations. So yeah, thank you for highlighting that.
Thank you. There isn't any further questions, or I'd just like to make a comment. I think it's good that we have this policy now in place. It will help different services to work together, and this will help enable us to protect our vulnerable customers. This report does contain recommendations for approval. Are we all agreed? Yeah, that's agreed. That's unanimous. Thank you very much, Tim. Moving on to the next item, item 11. This is on page 119 of the agenda pack, and John West will be presenting again, and this is the Commission of the Debt Recovery Services.
Thank you. So a lot of this follows on from some of the discussion we've just had. So the report recommends that the Finance Committee approve the commissioning of debt recovery services for 4 years from 16th of March 24 to 15th of March 28, with an estimated cost to the Council of £300,000. The Council's new corporate debt policy states that timely and consistent collection of debt owed to the Council is imperative to ensure that the Council can support the residents of our city by providing essential services. And as we've discussed, most of our recovery activity is carried out in-house, but the Council does also use external providers, particularly at the advanced stages of recovery. So these include enforcement agents, for example, for the recovery of parking fines, debt collection agencies, for example, for the recovery of sundry debts and former tenants' arrears, tracing agents for conducting tracing checks. So, for example, if someone's moved outside Sheffield or have moved address, we're able to trace their whereabouts, and High Court enforcement officers, for example, to recover unpaid commercial debt. These will generally be employed where the Council's own recovery processes have been exhausted, where resilience is required at times of peak demand, or where recovery activity is outside the city. The commission of services over a 4-year period is recommended, as it will offer stability to the Council and the providers, present an opportunity to providers to enter into longer-term and less burdensome repayment arrangements with debtors, and allow providers to offer more favourable commercial terms to the Council. As well as a requirement to operate in accordance with all relevant legislation, providers will be required to deliver these services in accordance with the Council's corporate debt policy, including the appropriate treatment of potentially vulnerable groups. Therefore, when we procure these services, potential providers will be required to commit to meeting the Council's corporate debt policy standards and demonstrate how they will achieve them, including the provision of relevant performance and monitoring information. The current services end in March 24, so the report recommends the approval of this commissioning decision so we can prepare for the future delivery of these functions.
Is there any questions? No? Okay, thank you for that, John. There isn't any further questions or comments, but we do have recommendations for approval. Are we all agreed? Yep, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's all for today's meeting. The next meeting is on 6th of November at 2 p.m. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you.
Thank you.